You've tried to fix this, you tried to understand it, you tried to control it, you tried to get better, and somewhere along the way, you started to believe the problem was you, that you think too much, that you feel too much, that something inside you is too much. But it's not. What's happening is quieter than that, more automatic, older, and that's why it feels impossible to shut off, because it wasn't a conscious choice. You didn't wake up one day and decide to live like this. You didn't choose to analyze everything. You didn't choose to stay 3 steps ahead. You didn't choose to feel like something's always about to go wrong. It just started happening, slowly, no warning, no noise, until it became your default. And the most dangerous thing about a pattern is that it doesn't feel like a pattern. It feels like identity. It feels like personality. It feels like this is just who I am. But it's not who you are. It's something you learned to do. And now it's running on its own, like a loop, a cycle that starts before you even notice it. You wake up, and before anything even happens, your mind is already ahead, simulating, predicting, adjusting, getting ready for something that doesn't even exist yet. And it gives you this false sense of control, like you're protecting yourself, like you're staying ahead of problems. But in reality, you never get to rest, because there's no end to something that hasn't even begun. And that's where the loop closes. You try to solve what hasn't happened, so it never gets solved. So you try again, and again, and again. And the more you try to get out, the more stuck you feel, like you're walking in circles inside your own head, and part of you already sees it. You've had that moment where you stop and think, why am I doing this again? But it doesn't last, because right after, the cycle comes back, faster, more automatic, more convincing, and you slip into it without even noticing, again and again and again, until it becomes routine, until it feels normal, until it feels like you. But it's not you. This isn't who you are. This is something you built to protect yourself, and that matters, because it changes everything. This wasn't weakness. You were trying to stay safe, trying to avoid pain, trying to see rejection before it hit, trying not to be caught off guard, trying to hold on to some kind of control when you didn't have any. And for a while, it worked. It made you more alert, more prepared, more safe. But there's a cost, and that cost shows up when the danger is gone, but the system is still on, when the environment has changed, but you haven't, when you don't need to defend anymore, but you're still defending, against everything, against everyone, against situations that aren't even threats, and most of all, against yourself. Because now it's not just about the world out there, it's about what's happening in here. Every thought feels like a signal, every doubt feels like a risk, every silence feels like something's wrong, and you respond to all of it. Like it's urgent, like it all needs to be figured out right now, but it doesn't. Your body just doesn't know that. Your mind doesn't trust that, because it's been trained over and over not to. And this is where most people get stuck, because they try to stop thinking. They try to calm down. They try to ignore it, but that only feeds the loop. Because underneath, your system reads that as another threat, another thing to control, another thing that might spiral. So it tightens even more thoughts, more analyzing, more tension, more repetition. And now you're inside a cycle you didn't create, but one that now depends on you to keep going. And this isn't your fault, but now it's your responsibility. And that might be the hardest part to accept, because there is a moment, a very specific one, almost invisible, where the loop begins, before the thoughts get loud, before the anxiety rises, before the tension hits your body. There's a split second, a small gap where you're not fully in yet, but you step in anyway, every time, without noticing, because now it's a habit, a reflex, automatic, and that's where it all begins. Not in the chaos, in the detail, in almost nothing. In that moment, your mind tries to predict and you go with it. That moment, a doubt shows up and you follow it down. That moment, something small feels off and you start digging. It feels harmless, but it's not, because that's the entry point. And once you're in, you already know how it goes. Hours pass, your energy drains, you drift away from the present, you get lost in possibilities, and in the end, nothing actually happened again. And it repeats so many times that the exhaustion starts to feel different. It's not physical, it's internal, like you're always busy, but never getting anywhere, always alert, but never safe, always thinking, but never at peace. And still, you keep going, because stopping feels dangerous, not thinking feels irresponsible, letting go feels risky, and that traps you more than anything outside ever could, because there's nowhere to run. It's with you all the time, anywhere, any moment, even in the quiet, even in the good moments, even when nothing's happening, especially when nothing's happening, and little by little, you start losing something important without noticing. No warning, no clear moment where it disappeared. You lose presence, you lose lightness, you lose the ability to just be. Without fixing, without predicting, without adjusting, and it didn't happen all at once. It was a process, an adaptation, a way of protecting yourself that went too far. And now you're here, reading this, maybe with that strange sense of recognition, like someone is putting words to something you've never been able to explain. That's not a coincidence, because this pattern isn't rare. It's just invisible. It hides inside productivity, inside worry, inside responsibility, inside the idea of always staying one step ahead. But underneath, it's just a loop, a cycle that starts small, grows fast, and pulls you in. Again and again and again. And now that you can see it, now that you can recognize the beginning, something shifts, not out there, in here, because for the first time, you're not just inside the loop, you're looking at it, and that creates space. Small, almost invisible, but real, a space between you and what your mind is doing. And that space is where things begin to change, even if you don't know how yet, even if it still feels the same, even if the loop keeps happening, because it will, for now. But something is different. There's awareness, a pause, a slight delay between the impulse and what you do next. And inside that delay, that's where the decision lives. But until now, you were never there to see it. You were already in, every time, without noticing. And that's why it felt inevitable, because you never saw the beginning, only the middle, only the chaos, only the exhaustion. But now you're starting to catch the entry point. That subtle moment when everything is still quiet, but about to move. And even then, you step in, again, almost automatically, like something is pulling you, like it's stronger than you, like you don't have a choice. And that's exactly how the pattern survives. Not through intensity, but through repetition you don't see, through quiet habit, through a decision you don't realize you're making, again and again and again, until it feels like you never had a choice, until it feels like it's always been this way, until it feels like there's no way out. But there is, just not where you've been looking, because it doesn't start with control, it doesn't start with force, it doesn't start with trying to stop. It starts exactly where you've been overlooking, in that small moment, almost irrelevant, where you could still not step in, but you do. And now you're starting to catch it, even if you can't stop it yet, even if it still pulls you in, even if it still feels automatic, you're beginning to see it, and that changes your relationship to it, because before you were completely inside. Now you're inside, but you're also watching. And that creates a different kind of tension, quieter, more aware. That feeling of, I know I'm doing it again. And that feeling, it grows, because the more you notice, the harder it is to ignore, the more obvious the pattern becomes, the clearer the cycle gets. And at the same time, the harder it is to keep going, because now you know, now you see it, now you recognize it, and still you step in again and again and again, like you're stuck in something you didn't choose, but keep repeating anyway. And that's exactly what it is, a loop, quiet, automatic, invisible. It didn't start with you, but now it runs through you, and without even noticing, you're already back inside it. And this is where something starts to speed up, almost like the system realizes you're watching, like the moment you gain a little awareness, it pushes harder, not in an obvious way, but subtly, more thoughts, more scenarios, more small doubts that suddenly feel too important to ignore. You can feel it, a quiet urgency, a pressure that doesn't come from outside but feels real, like something needs to be handled right now, like not looking would be a mistake, like letting it go would be risky. And then it happens. You step in, again. But this time, it feels different, because now there's a part of you watching, noticing, seeing it unfold while it's happening, and that creates a strange conflict. One part wants to keep going, the other already knows where this leads, and still, you keep going, because the impulse is fast, faster than awareness, more practiced, more automatic, and suddenly you're already in the middle of it, thinking, analyzing, replaying everything in your head, trying to predict what might happen, trying to adjust something that hasn't even happened yet. And underneath all of it, you're trying to feel some kind of relief, some kind of certainty, some kind of answer that makes it all stop. But it doesn't stop, because it wasn't built to stop. It was built to run, and this is where the pattern really shows itself, not in the anxiety, in the urgency, that quiet rush that comes out of nowhere. It doesn't care about context, it doesn't wait for logic, it just says, fix this, now. Even when there's nothing real to fix, even when it's just a feeling, even when it's just a passing thought, it gets weight, it gets importance, it moves to the front of the line, and you respond like it's real, like it's urgent, like it matters. And that reinforces everything, because every time you respond, you teach your mind that it matters, that it deserves attention, that it should get your energy, and it learns fast. Too fast. It starts getting ahead of you even more, creating more possibilities, more reasons for you to step back into the loop, and you become more sensitive to everything. Any small detail becomes a trigger. Any shift becomes a signal. Any silence becomes a question, and you don't notice when it starts. You only notice when you're already inside, again, and little by little, it starts affecting more than just your thoughts. It starts shaping your decisions, your relationships, the way you show up. You hesitate more, you double-check more, you doubt more. Even the simple things, even the things that used to feel natural, and it slowly pulls you away from something essential. Trust. Not trust in the world, trust in yourself, in your ability to feel and move, to notice and act, to not know, and still keep going. Because now everything has to be approved first. Everything has to be analyzed first. Everything has to pass through this mental filter that's never satisfied, and it wears you down, but you keep going. Because stopping feels worse. Not engaging feels careless. Ignoring it feels risky, so you maintain it. You keep the pattern alive, you keep the effort going, you stay on guard without even realizing it. And there's a specific moment when this becomes even clearer. It's when you try not to step in, when you catch the beginning and try to stop. That's when the discomfort spikes. The urgency gets louder. Your mind starts pushing harder, like it's saying, no, this one you need to look at. And that's what makes it confusing, because it feels important, it feels different, it feels like this time it's real, but it's not. It's the same pattern, wearing something new, and it's good at that. It adapts, it updates itself, it finds new ways to pull you in, new arguments, new reasons, new stories, always convincing, always reasonable, always just enough to get you to step in again. And this isn't because you're weak. This was never weakness. You were trying to protect yourself, trying to make sure nothing went wrong, trying to avoid pain before it showed up, trying to hold control in a place where there wasn't much to hold. And at some point, it was necessary. At some point, it helped you. At some point, it made sense. But now it's automatic. And what used to be protection has turned into a cage with no walls, no bars, no visible doors, because it's happening in here. And that's why it feels impossible to leave, because you can't run from your own mind. But there's something you haven't fully seen yet. Something underneath the loop, something holding all of this in place. And it's not the thoughts, it's not the scenarios, it's not the doubts, it's the function of it. The real reason it keeps happening, because as uncomfortable as it feels, There's a logic to it. There's a hidden purpose. There's something this pattern is trying to do for you, even if the result is the opposite, even if it drains you, even if it traps you. It didn't start as the enemy. It started as a solution, and that changes everything, because when something begins as a solution, you don't fight it. You maintain it. You reinforce it. You protect it without realizing it. And that's why it keeps going. Because deep down, a part of you still believes you need it, still believes it's helping, still believes it's preventing something worse. And as long as that part is there, the loop continues, no matter how much you understand it, no matter how hard you try to stop, no matter how much you want out, because this isn't just about stopping the pattern, it's about understanding what it's trying to do and what it's trying to avoid, and that takes you somewhere deeper, somewhere you don't usually look, something that doesn't sit on the surface, something that isn't in the thoughts, but behind them, a quiet presence, constant, almost invisible, that starts to become clearer when you stop fighting the loop and start noticing what comes before it, before the urgency, before the doubt, before the analysis. There's a feeling, very subtle, very fast, but always there, a kind of micro discomfort, a slight tension, an almost unnoticeable unease. It shows up and disappears too quickly to catch. And that's where it begins, not in the thought, in that feeling. And the whole loop is an attempt to escape it, to explain it, to fix it, to not feel it. But you never really look at it. You skip right past it, go straight to the mind, straight to the thoughts, straight to the analysis. And you miss the most important part, because that feeling has a name. Even if you've never called it that, even if you've spent years ignoring it, it's there. It's always been there, and it's what triggers everything, the loop, the urgency, the repetition, that need to figure it out. And the more you avoid feeling that, the harder your system works to pull you away from it. More thoughts, more distraction, more analysis, more movement, anything to keep you from staying there, in that spot, that split second, that first hint of discomfort. Because in that moment, there's something you didn't want to see, something that never got answered, something that at some point was too much for you to handle. So instead of feeling it, you learned to think, and that stuck. It repeated, it got stronger, until it became automatic, until it turned into this loop that now feels impossible to break. But it's not impossible. It's protecting something you haven't really faced yet, something that doesn't have a name yet, but it's getting close. And when that happens, everything starts to shift, because once something has a name, it loses its grip, and you're closer to that than you think, closer than you've ever been, even if it still feels confusing, even if it still feels automatic, even if it still feels stronger than you. Because now, you're not just stuck in the loop, you're starting to see what's holding it in place. And that's the beginning of something new, a kind of clarity that doesn't come from control. It comes from seeing, even if it still hurts, even if it's still uncomfortable, even if it still pulls you back in, because it will for a while. But now, it's not invisible anymore. Now, it has shape, it has a pattern, it has a beginning, and it's getting closer to having a name. And when it does, you'll understand why this was never really about anxiety. And once this starts to become clear, you can't go back to not seeing it, because up until now, you could still justify it. You could still call it concern, responsibility, just your way of trying to make things work. But now something else starts to show up, and it doesn't fit those explanations anymore. Something more raw, more direct, harder to hide. Because if you're honest, you'll see it's not about fixing anything. It's not about finding answers. It's not about predicting what might go wrong. It's about avoiding something very specific, something that shows up in that split second, before the thought, before the analysis, before the urgency kicks in. That feeling, small, almost invisible, but heavy. And the more you try to ignore it, the more it insists, the more it comes back, the more it leaks into everything. And you keep doing what you've always done, thinking, analyzing, rechecking, trying to control. But now it starts to lose its grip, not because you're stronger, but because it's clearer, more exposed, harder to deny, because you start to notice that even after you think it through, even after you go over everything, Even after you try to solve it, that feeling is still there, untouched, waiting, like nothing you did ever really reached it, because it didn't. It was never about the thoughts. They're just the root, the mechanism, the distraction, the movement that pulls you away from the center. And the center is what you're starting to face now, without filters, without easy explanations, without being able to escape so quickly. And that creates a different kind of discomfort, more direct, more real, less confusing, but harder to run from, because now you know, now you feel it, now you recognize it, and still the urge to get away is there. The urge to go back to the pattern, to step into the loop, to think about anything that pulls you out of this moment. And that's the clearest sign. This was never about solving anything. It's about escaping feeling, escaping facing something that at some point in your life was too much. Too intense, too fast, and you didn't have the space to process it, so you did what you could. You adapted. You built a way out, a way to not stay there, a way to leave quickly, a way to never have to feel that again at the same intensity. And that way was thinking, controlling, predicting, staying ahead, getting ready for everything. Because if you can predict it, maybe it won't hurt again. If you can control it, maybe it won't catch you off guard. If you can avoid it, maybe you'll never have to feel that again. And back then, that made sense. It was smart. It was necessary. It was the best you could do with what you had. That wasn't weakness. You were trying to protect yourself, but time passed. The context changed, you changed, and the system didn't. It keeps running the same pattern, like the danger is still here, like it's all about to happen again, like you still need to escape. And that's where the trap forms, because it's not the event anymore. It's not the past. It's the pattern, the reflex, the automatic repetition of something that doesn't make sense anymore, but is still active, and it starts to feel unsustainable. Because now you see it, now you notice it, now you can't pretend it's just who you are. And at the same time, you still don't know how to step out, because stepping out feels like feeling, and feeling still feels dangerous. Even if you know logically that it's not, even if you're safe now. Even if nothing is happening, your body doesn't follow that. Your system doesn't believe it. It just runs what it learned. And this is where the shift begins. Not when you stop the loop, but when you stay. Even with the urge to leave, even with the impulse to think, even with the pressure to fix it, you stay for a few seconds, sometimes less, but it's already different. Because before, you didn't even see it. Now you see it, and you don't immediately run. And that changes the dynamic, because for the first time, you're not feeding the pattern automatically. You're interrupting it, even if it's messy, even if it's brief, even if you still fall back in right after. That small space is not the same anymore. It's not invisible, it's not automatic. And in that space, something new starts to show up. It's not control, it's not instant calm, it's not relief. It's awareness, it's presence. It's you, right there, watching the impulse rise, without immediately following it. And that's uncomfortable, a lot, because you feel more, you notice more, you're more exposed. But it's also the first time you're not completely run by the pattern. And that opens something up. Small, but real. The possibility of not reacting the same way. The possibility of not stepping in every time. The possibility of not feeding the cycle. And slowly, that begins to reveal something deeper. Something that's been sitting behind all of this. Something the loop has been protecting. Something that starts to come into view because you're not running as fast anymore. And what shows up isn't what you expected. It's not a thought. It's not an explanation. It's not something you can fix quickly. It's a feeling, older, heavier, more honest, and with it comes something you may have never named out loud, but it's always been there, in the background, shaping your reactions, holding the pattern in place. And when it starts to take form, it's hard to ignore, because it's not vague anymore. It's not just something off. It's specific, recognizable. It has its own logic, and suddenly everything starts to make sense. Every loop, every repetition, every surge of urgency, every attempt to control, not as a mistake, but as a consequence. And there's a strange kind of clarity in that, because even though it hurts to see, it also brings relief, because now there's direction. Now there's something real, something you can actually see, not just feel. And this is the moment where the shadow stops being invisible, stops being just background noise, and starts to reveal itself, not as an enemy, but as a part of you. A part that learned how to protect, a part that got stuck in time, a part that still believes you need to escape. And that part has a name you may have never said out loud, but the moment you hear it, everything clicks, because this was never about anxiety, not really. It's about rejection, not the surface kind, not social rejection, but something deeper. That feeling of not being enough, of not being accepted, of not being safe, just being who you are. And that changes everything, because now the loop has a root. Now the pattern has a reason. Now the urgency has an origin. You weren't trying to control the future. You were trying to avoid feeling that again. That specific feeling, that quiet pain, that constant fear that at some point you won't be enough. And once that becomes clear, you can't treat this like something vague anymore, because now it has a face, a shape, a history, and most of all, it has impact on everything, your choices, your relationships, the way you show up, the way you hold back, the way you adapt, the way you protect yourself, and all of that starts to reorganize inside you, like pieces finally falling into place, even if it still hurts, even if it's still confusing, even if it's not resolved yet, because clarity doesn't fix everything, but it changes where you start from. And now you're somewhere you've never been before. You're not just feeling, you're not just reacting, you're not just stuck in the loop, you're seeing, and seeing clearly. And once you see clearly, you can't go back to not seeing. And that creates a different kind of responsibility, not heavy, but unavoidable. Because now you know, now you recognize it, now you understand, and that changes what you're willing to keep doing, even if you still do it, even if you still step in, even if you still repeat it. It's not the same anymore, because now you know exactly what's happening, and you can't pretend it's just anxiety anymore. And from this point on, it's not about figuring anything out anymore. It's about what you do with what you've seen, because seeing changes everything, but it doesn't change things instantly. It doesn't fix it. It doesn't erase the pattern. It doesn't shut the loop off. It'll still happen. You'll still step in. You'll still feel the urgency. You'll still feel that pull to think, control, predict, like it's the only way out. But now, there's something that wasn't there before. A choice. Small, almost invisible, but real. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think change comes from big moves, strong decisions, some kind of dramatic shift. It doesn't. It comes from this tiny point where you barely notice you have an option. That's why it gets missed, because it feels too small to matter. But it's the opposite. That small step is what changes everything, just not in the way you expect. It's not a step that solves anything. It's a step that interrupts, that creates space, that breaks the automatic flow of the pattern. And when that repeats, it starts to change the system, not in theory, in real life, in your body, in your responses, in your reflexes. And that step isn't stop thinking. It isn't calm down. It isn't controlling your mind. It's simpler than that and harder. It's not running away. It's staying for 1 second longer, right at the point where you always leave. That first sensation, the one you've always avoided, the one that triggers everything. You don't fix it. You don't explain it. You don't try to make it better. You just don't leave right away. And that sounds small, but it isn't. Because it's the first time you don't reinforce the old path, the first time you allow yourself to feel without turning it into thought, without turning it into analysis, without turning it into action. And that changes the internal logic, because your system expects movement. It expects a response. It expects you to enter the loop. And when you don't respond the same way, even for a moment, something gets disrupted, something loses strength, something starts to break. And that's where the training begins, not as discipline, not as a rule, but as conscious repetition. You notice the beginning, you feel the impulse, and instead of following it automatically, you pause, even if it's just a second, even if it's brief, even if you still fall into it right after, it's still different because that second existed. And that second is where change starts, because little by little, that space grows from 1 second to 2, from 2 to 3. And without even realizing it, you start to have time to choose, time to not react the same way, time to not feed the pattern right away. And that starts to affect everything. The thoughts still come, but they don't carry the same weight. Your mind still pulls, but it doesn't have the same grip because you're not responding at the same speed anymore. And that difference, as small as it seems, is what reshapes the system, not all at once, but over time. And this is where something new comes in, something you haven't really practiced before, not just observing your mind, but taking a position in relation to it, not as someone who fights, but as someone who decides not to follow everything, decides not to believe everything, decides not to respond to everything. And that's not easy, because the pattern will push back. It'll try to convince you. It'll create urgency. It'll create discomfort. It'll make it feel like you're doing something wrong, but you're not. This was never weakness. You were trying to protect yourself, and now you're learning a different way to protect yourself, without running from yourself, without running from what you feel, without getting lost in the loop. And this takes repetition, consistency, presence, not perfect, but ongoing. That's why understanding it once isn't enough. You have to live it, practice it, mess it up, come back to it again and again until it starts to feel natural, and slowly the old pattern loses ground, not because you destroyed it, but because you stopped feeding it. And at the same time, something new starts to take shape, a different way of being, less reactive, less automatic, more direct, more simple, more present. And that doesn't mean you'll never feel this again, never have thoughts, never step into the loop. It means it doesn't run you the same way. There's space now, distance, choice, and that changes everything. The way you relate to yourself, to other people, to what happens around you, because you're not reacting all the time anymore. You're living, even with discomfort, even with uncertainty, even without having all the answers. And that's the opposite of what you were doing before. Before, you were trying to guarantee. Now you're learning to hold. Before, you were trying to avoid. Now you're learning to feel without getting lost. Before, you were trying to control. Now you're learning to trust. And that trust doesn't come from certainty. It comes from experience, from repetition, from seeing that you can stay and not break, that you can feel and not disappear, that you cannot engage and still be okay. And that rebuilds something you lost a long time ago. Trust in yourself, not in your thoughts, but in your ability to handle things, to hold them, to move through them without needing to escape. And that's what changes everything, because in the end, the loop was never the real problem. The problem was what you believed would happen if you didn't enter it. And now you're starting to see none of that was real. The danger isn't here. You don't need to run anymore. You don't need to protect yourself the same way. And that opens a completely new space, a space where you can choose differently, act differently, and little by little step out of this pattern, not by force, but naturally, like someone who just doesn't need it anymore. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it starts right here, in this moment where you notice, feel, and choose not to step in the same way. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, you begin to experience something that felt far away: silence. Not the absence of thought, but the absence of struggle. A quiet inside that doesn't come from control, but from presence. And that is the beginning of a life that doesn't revolve around the loop. A life where you're not trying to escape yourself, but finally able to stay.